Okay, we are officially at 11 o'clock Central Time, so we'll get this webinar rolling. First off, just want to show our complete appreciation for all of you who are attending today. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I know is a bit of a tricky subject for many of us, which is that the cost of operating a fleet is becoming more and more expensive, and the requesting or receiving the funds in order to match those expenses is becoming increasingly difficult. So today we'll be exploring how fleet managers can leverage the reports or the data that you have around your fleet in order to make a compelling case to your C-suite, to your boss, to your executives, in order to receive additional funds for your fleet operations. Whether your organization is using spreadsheets or a fleet management software to keep track of your data, this webinar should provide you with some pretty valuable information, we're hoping. Before I hand the reins over to Alex, who is also on the webinar today, he'll be walking you through all the different reports and processes that you can take. I also wanted to give you a quick overview of everything that we'll be sharing with you today. Our presentation is divided into 4 sections where we'll be examining the market forces that are calling for the need for a larger fleet budget. We'll discuss some of the challenges that we're hearing from fleet managers who are trying to ask for funds but are having difficulty receiving the funds that they need. And then we'll also talk through how reports can help alleviate some of those difficulties. And then after that, we'll take a look at some example reports and run through some hypothetical scenarios to really show you how you can take these situations, find a report for the situation, and then share it with the higher ups at your organization. And then lastly, we'll wrap things up by walking through how Fleetio handles these reports and how you can use the data within your Fleetio platform if you're a customer in order to make these cases on behalf of your fleet. So why is Fleetio putting on today's webinar? Fleetio is a fleet maintenance management platform that started back in 2012. We work with thousands of fleets and fleet managers to help them manage their maintenance. And we also partner with some big names in the industry like Geotab, Samsara, Jiffy Lube, Firestone, and more to bring all of your fleet data into one platform to help you optimize your fleet operations. The contents of this presentation are based around conversations that we've had with these industry partners, but also countless fleet managers and Fleetio customers around the world. Customers like the ones that you see here depend, oh no, I went too far. Customers like the ones that you see here depend on Fleetio to get better control of their fleet maintenance. These customers represent a wide variety of industries and operate across more than 80 countries. And at the end of the day, while all of these businesses operate in completely different spaces, it's clear that all fleets are facing some pretty similar challenges when it comes to receiving the funds that they need to operate and run their fleet vehicles. And I've made it this far without formally introducing the two of us who are on this webinar. So let me fix that. My name is Zach. And as I said, Alex will be leading the webinar today. We're both on the content team here at Fleetio, and our job is to talk to people within the fleet industry like yourself in order to find topics or themes or hurdles that fleet managers are facing in order to help provide you with information and tips to improve your fleet around that space, which leads us right into today's conversation. Alex, I'll hand things over to you.
Thanks, Zach. Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Borg. Thanks so much for taking the time today to attend our webinar. We've got a lot to go over, so let's hop right into things by examining why many fleets around the country have been feeling the need to raise their operating budgets over the last few years or so. So I'm sure it's news to no one here that the US and also the larger world has been grappling with historic levels of inflation since around the tail end of the pandemic. I remember hearing about it every time I read the news last year, and all of us are still reminded of inflation every time we head down to the grocery store. And while pinning down the exact causes of inflation is a little tricky, economists generally agree that some combination of volatile energy prices, a backlog of orders that built up during the pandemic when supply chains were thrown into disarray, and also price changes involving various auto-related sectors. Those 3 factors had something to do with the significant weakening of the dollar's purchasing power in recent years. Thankfully, as you can see from the data that we're looking at now that's supplied from the Federal Reserve, we managed to make it to the other side of this inflation peak. These days, inflation is occurring at a significantly lower rate compared to around the middle of 2022. And after so much economic turmoil, the current stability that we're enjoying is undeniably good news. But the bad news is that prices of all kinds of goods and services that fleets rely on, they just haven't reset to their pre-inflation levels. What you're looking at is a graph summarizing how operating costs have changed year over year throughout the last decade for trucking fleets in particular. This data comes from an annual report published by the American Transportation Research Institute, and it encompasses all the cost centers you can think of. Think fuel, vehicle payments, repair and maintenance, insurance premiums, tires, tolls, drivers, wages and benefits, basically the whole shebang. And much like how inflation surged once the worst of COVID was behind us, the average cost per mile for motor carriers skyrocketed over a very similar timeline. Just 4 years ago, trucking fleets spent only $1.65 per mile their vehicles traveled. But as of last year, 2023, those same fleets have been shelling out $2.27 per mile doing the same work. And while this data is specific to the trucking industry, it's reflective of what fleets in just about every industry have been dealing with as of late. So, put simply, it's noticeably more expensive to operate a fleet these days. And when your expenses have gone up, it only makes sense for your operating budget to adjust accordingly. But while increased expenses are the leading cause of fleet managers to request additional budget, especially these days, they're not the only one. It's also common for fleet managers to ask for more funds to work with when their assets are really starting to show their age and their existing budget just doesn't account for purchasing and procuring replacements. In other cases, fleet managers might approach their bosses for extra cash when their operations are experiencing productivity bottlenecks that only additional assets or additional personnel can resolve. And on top of that, sometimes fleet managers request additional budget for upgrades to their existing assets, telematics devices, vehicle diagnostic devices, in-cab cameras, and all sorts of other upgrades can make a big difference to modern fleet operations. And it's important to remember that the things you get from additional fleet funds enable you to achieve meaningful business objectives. With more drivers and technicians, your fleet is able to accomplish more work, both on behalf of your clients, but also in terms of just keeping your assets operational, the preventive maintenance and repairs that keep your fleet running. And by simply having more people to share the workload, morale amongst your personnel tends to improve as well. And additionally, on top of that, with new vehicles and equipment, you're significantly less likely to face unplanned downtime caused by breakdowns and other asset issues. Furthermore, newer assets tend to be safer than their older equivalents, which is something your drivers are sure to appreciate. So a lot of things in life are easier said than done, and asking your boss for a larger fleet budget to work with definitely falls under that category. But when the success of your fleet operation requires additional resources, these kinds of tough conversations, they just can't really be avoided. So, with the ultimate goal of overcoming these challenges, let's briefly examine the hurdles fleet managers often face when requesting further funds. So, while fleets can accomplish a lot when given some extra budget to work with, just the simple act of requesting those additional funds can be really challenging. Let's be real. Even if you have a solid working relationship with the leadership at your organization, it's not easy to say, our current budget just won't cut it. Even if you've repeatedly crunched the numbers and have compelling arguments to support your case, in some way, you might feel like a strange sense of guilt, like you're the bearer of bad news, having to say your current fleet budget is insufficient. And if you let that doubt and anxiety fester, part of your brain might even tell you to just make it work with what you got, even when you know that your operations need more. And on top of that internal struggle, it's important to recognize that inflation has probably affected all aspects of your organization, not just fleet operations. It's entirely possible and maybe even likely that your coworkers in other departments, they might be asking for further funds to match our current economic moment like you are. And the more people that are asking for a larger slice of the pie, the harder you'll have the harder the fight you'll have to ensure your fleet operations receive their fair share. And lastly, fleet managers often have a hard time conveying their fleet's needs to certain higher ups. And I'm specifically talking about budget controllers who don't really get fleet operations. Just for example, convincing a penny pinching CFO with little knowledge of the work you do every day, that can be really tricky to say the least. This iceberg graphic really illustrates the divide between you and how non-fleet folks perceive your operational expenses. People who don't interact with vehicles as their profession often view fleet operations as a cost center with just two buckets. You've got maintenance and you've got fuel. This perception likely stems from just their personal understanding of how they operate the vehicles they own. They know vehicles require maintenance to stay running, and they require fuel to go from point A to point B. That's about it. And while it's completely fine for non-fleet folks to stick to their own areas of expertise, issues arise when they control the purse strings. If you tell them your operating expenses have increased, they might tell you that, fuel prices fluctuate all the time. I'm sure things will normalize in a few weeks. Or they might try to say, well, why not do a little less maintenance to save a few bucks? Because they don't understand your fleet's needs, they might push back with these kinds of arguments. But thankfully, you can use reports to bridge the knowledge gap between you and the decision makers at your organization, whether they have fleet experience or not. And that's what we'll be covering in this section. I'd like to preface this whole section with a quote from a Fleetio customer. So Bob Polka is the director of fleet operations at Treeways, which is a Pennsylvania-based full-service vegetation management company. And on the topic of asking for budget, he had this to say. If you can demonstrate that you've got control of your fleet, it's been my experience that stakeholders are way more inclined to let you have some money because now they feel like you're going to control that money as well as you're controlling your fleet. And I really like this quote because it lays out the solution for any fleet manager looking to secure more funds for their operations. You simply have to demonstrate the control you have over your fleet, and decision makers will let you control more budget. And this is where fleet reports come in. The reason fleet reports are so valuable is because they present data that can support your arguments for more fleet funds. Without hard numbers, decision makers have to take you at your word and trust your instincts as a fleet manager when you ask for additional funding. But reports provide irrefutable evidence of your fleet's strengths and weaknesses. Instead of only being able to say, our older vehicles are becoming too expensive to maintain, we need to replace them, reports enable you to show the exact costs you're putting into those older vehicles, what you're investing to repair them, and precisely how often they're out of service. And it's that specificity that's really compelling, especially to the cost conscious and those who don't know the ins and outs of fleet management. And while generic reports are incredibly powerful in their own right, by tailoring reports to the specific interests of the different stakeholders that you're trying to get on your side, their value as a tool for securing additional funds grows exponentially. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at how different kinds of fleet reports suit the focus areas of different decision makers at fleet organizations. We'll begin with CEOs. So as the highest authority at their workplace, Most CEOs tend to focus on the big picture health and success of their organization. Typically speaking, they're more than fine with entrusting nitty-gritty concerns to specialized leaders that may or may not report to them directly. And as such, high-level metrics related to ROI, or return on investment, speak the most to CEOs. So if someone tells them to invest in more fleet operations, they'll want to know why. What would be the benefit from spending that additional money? So when running reports for CEOs or lobbying them for additional resources, we suggest that you use data points like total cost of ownership to convey the necessity of further fleet funds. And when it comes to investing in fleet operations, moving on, COOs should be just as enthusiastic about investing in your fleet as you. Driving productivity is a core focus of theirs. So resources that enable you and your drivers and technicians to accomplish more work, that should be something that they're willing to advocate for among their C-suite peers whenever they have the chance. And they should also value your insight as a fleet manager on what resources would best suit the needs of your fleet at any given time. Your job is to convey to them how new purchases will translate to greater fleet efficiency. To do that, focus on productivity influencers like start of day impact, reliability, and safety. For example, you can use vehicle status and utilization summary reports to show the amount of downtime that could be reduced with newer, more reliable assets. And as for CFOs, you might have more in common with them than you might initially think. Sure, your work is a lot more boots on the ground compared to them, but at the end of the day, you're both concerned with running a tight ship that makes optimal use of your organization's resources. Their purview just happens to be wider than strictly fleet operations. CFOs will mostly be concerned with cost-related metrics, including projected ROI for new assets. So in addition to TCO, you can use fuel and maintenance reports to show how much specific vehicles are running up those budgets. Additionally, fleet utilization reports can also sway them when advocating for growing your fleet. So stepping outside of the suite now, it's becoming increasingly common for fleet organizations to have folks who have safety built right into their job title. And while safety managers and related roles may not have as much direct budget control as the executives that we just discussed, getting them on your side can make your arguments go a lot further when it comes to investing additional funds to your fleet. So by providing them with data that shows how safety at your organization could be improved with the right resources, you can have them advocate for a greater fleet budget from their area of expertise. Your safety manager will most likely be interested in data related to driver behavior, as well as documentation like background checks, inspections, hours of service logs, that sort of thing. Inspection failure and DTC fault reports can go a long way in providing newer assets that would be safer on the road. And routing out our list of folks who would benefit from receiving tailored reports, let's talk about lead technicians, service managers, people with those sorts of roles. Again, while these roles don't have the ability to authorize budget bumps for you directly, turning them into an ally for your cause can ultimately help you attain the funds that you're fighting for. Your lead tech is probably already going to be knowledgeable at the state of your fleet. And if you've got a few vehicles that have outlived their usefulness, they probably already know. So using vehicle status and service summary reports, you and your lead tech can determine which vehicles are in most need of replacement, and you guys can collaboratively make a data-driven procurement plan.
Thanks for all of that, Alex. And now that we've established the theoretical value of reports, I would love to run through some of this and really see how it looks in practice. So, Alex, I've put together a few quick scenarios. I'm going to pitch them to you. And then for each of those, I would like for you to share what kind of reporting or metrics or numbers people can share to the decision maker in that instance in order to try to procure fleet funds. So let's do it. First off, let's say that you are a fleet manager who has noticed that your operating costs just keep rising quarter over quarter. I imagine people watching can relate to this pretty directly. You think that it's because your older vehicles have really started to show their age this year, but you want to prove this. You know that they're in the shop every other month and that your repair costs are really starting to add up, but your CEO is asking for concrete examples. What reports would you run to try and prove these suspicions to your CEO?
So, as we previously mentioned, CEOs tend to be focused on the big picture. So, reports like the ones we're looking at right here, these sorts of metrics, these high-level metrics, are great for them. In this particular case, I'd point out how dramatically our maintenance expenses have jumped since the beginning of the year. After that, I'd attribute the jump to our oldest vehicles by showing them what we've been spending on their maintenance and repair as of late. I'd also show them the current CPM and compare it to their CPM in past years to highlight their decreasing reliability. And from there, I'd make the case that if we were to replace those older vehicles with newer ones, uh, we'd really benefit from that. And so to make those procurements, I'd advocate for some additional funds to cover those costs.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like, if you've got the same amount of vehicles, you would assume that over time, the cost of maintenance should stay pretty consistent. So if that cost starts to rise, that's a good point to bring up to the CEO. Okay, next, let's say that you want to talk to your COO about the possibility of securing some additional funds in order to replace these older vehicles. So the CEO has acknowledged that it's a problem, but ultimately the COO is going to be the person who decides whether or not it's time to bring those vehicles in. What are some metrics that we can show to the COO in order to show that new vehicles are not necessarily just a nice to have in this instance? It's something that is a rising necessity for your fleet.
All right. So a report like this vehicle status summary report, it breaks down how often a vehicle has been active, meaning operational, capable of being used, how often it's been in the shop, and also out of service, how many days it's been in those various states. And while this level of specificity in this example, it's probably most viable with a dedicated fleet management system. Even if you're watching this and you primarily use spreadsheets, you could probably generate something similar to what we're looking at here. And by highlighting the stark difference between the reliability of our newest additions to the fleet at the top, and then comparing that to our more weathered, our older vehicles near the bottom, I think that really tells the story. It conveys the need to the CEO that by replacing those older assets, our unplanned downtime would really decrease, and it'd be really beneficial to the health of our fleet operations.
Yeah. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I think it's something like 1 day of unplanned downtime costs a fleet something like $750 in terms of lost work, and then how much it sidelines your operation. So seeing an asset that is down for 27 days, that hurts me inside. Yeah, that sounds like a vehicle that it's time to part ways with. All right, and then for this scenario, let's say that you are in a meeting with your CFO and they don't have any experience in fleet operations. So when you previously told them that your fleet's fuel costs are exceeding projections, they dismissed these concerns and said, fuel prices always peak in the summer. People are traveling, and I'm sure after we get past Labor Day, things will settle back down. What's a report that you could put together that shows them that this is not just a seasonal trend? It's something that's going to become a new issue for the fleet.
So a lot of people tend to have that mindset that fuel prices can't be controlled, and therefore a fleet can't control what they put into their fuel spending. But with reports like this, with these fuel expense summary reports, you can really illustrate that it's not just the cost of fuel that's a driving factor in terms of what you spend on fuel. It's also the efficiency of the vehicles themselves. And if you notice, like in the example here, that you once had a vehicle that was fairly fuel efficient, but due to age, due to suffering breakdowns, just generally becoming less efficient as time has gone on, it becomes increasingly burdensome to keep it on in your fleet. Its CPM rises, and with this report in particular, I'd highlight that disparity in fuel efficiency between a newer vehicle on the left and an older one. And of course, I'd acknowledge that, you know, with all these examples, I'm suggesting further procuring new vehicles, and I would recognize that that's a sizable investment. But I'd also simultaneously, I would stress that not replacing these older vehicles, that comes becomes an expense over time. And holding on to a vehicle that has a CPM of a cost per gallon of around 412, that becomes a liability past a certain point.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And all of these signs of like a vehicle that's slowly becoming more and more expensive eventually lead to a vehicle that's a lot more expensive. And so it's better to address these early on. All right, last scenario. Let's say that you are in a budget forecasting meeting with that same CFO. We're planning for 2025, and you're already running tight on your budget for 2024 and know that next year is going to be even tighter. How can you bring data to that budget meeting with your CFO and say that you need additional funding without making it seem like you're being a bad steward of your current budget?
So non-fleet related roles, they're often surprised by how expensive parts can be. Earlier in the presentation, we highlighted the disparity between what non-fleet roles, how they view your expenses and how you view your expenses. So you understand that parts are such a significant cost that they should really be built into your budget whenever you're planning for future years. So with a report like this, like a maintenance report, I would really convey that parts aren't a just negligible part of our expenses. There's something that should be considered at all times. So when presenting this data, I'd also explain that if we were to maintain a well-stocked parts reserve, it would be a lot more cost effective in the long run because we wouldn't have to pay for things like rush delivery in order to get a much needed asset back in action.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good note. And I think that, like, obviously today's webinar is around like creating the reports that allow you to secure additional funds. But by creating these reports and tracking this data and being a part of it, you're also taking an active approach to monitoring your fleet, and you could identify opportunities. There might be spaces where it's just a matter of improving a process, but by running these reports, you show, as Bob had said in that quote that you shared, you show your stakeholders that you put that extra degree of thought. You've looked into this and you've realized that it's not just a matter of like poor budget allocation, but it's a matter of like really needing the additional budget to run your fleet. So love it. Thanks for all of that, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the right know-how and a fair bit of time, all of the example reports that we were just looking at, they could produce if you tend to run your fleet operations with spreadsheets. But that isn't to say that generating reports with a spreadsheet and a fleet management system are similar experiences. There are real concrete benefits to using a dedicated fleet software for running your reports. And for this final section, we'll be taking a look at how Fleetio handles the reports that we've just been looking at. So Fleetio understands that fleets generate a ton of data. So our reports are designed to surface the key details you need to know and the kinds of valuable insights that often get overlooked when you're working in spreadsheets. Our comprehensive reports help you optimize your spend and track every expense so you can develop data-backed budgets that address your fleet's needs. And to give fleets the freedom to configure their reports however they like, Fleetio empowers users with a wide range of customization options, from different visualizations to the ability to toggle on different filters. Fleetio's reports enable you to pull any data you like and then display that data to your exact preferences. And finally, because Fleetio really values automation, and that's reflected in how we allow our users to share reports internally. Instead of having to manually run and export reports every time you want to show a stakeholder something, Fleetio can automatically send tailored reports to those individuals that you specify at whatever cadence you like. This not only saves you time, but it ensures that everyone who needs to be kept in the loop is always up to date.
Yeah, thanks for all of that. And then before we officially wrap things up, I wanted to go ahead and share our upcoming events calendar with you. So if you plan to attend any of these fleet industry conferences or trade shows that are coming up, come find us there. We'd love to connect with you in person, shake your hand, show you some of our reports in Fleetio. And we'll be adding to this list as the year goes on. So you can search Google for Fleetio conferences or head to fleetio.com/conferences in order to see this full up-to-date list. And if you're looking for the right fleet maintenance software for your fleet, maybe a place to run better reports and start tracking those costs, obviously I would love to recommend Fleetio. Fleetio is an end-to-end fleet optimization platform that checks all of the boxes that you need in order to keep your fleet vehicles running, regardless of whether you have a team of in-house techs or you send everything to a third-party maintenance shop. And if you're trying to find data-driven ways to improve your fleet operations, while Alex and I are obviously biased, I don't think there's a better solution on the market than Fleetio. So you can learn more about this or get a personalized demo from a product specialist by going to fleetio.com/demo. That's FLEETIO.com. You can see it right there on that slide. And that's all that we had for today. I will be sharing the link to this deck in the video description once the video is done processing. We appreciate all of you for attending and watching. And please reach out if there's ever anything that we can do to help you figure out how to generate reports or figure out how to communicate with people outside of fleet about your fleet.